Oh, you're so good at remembering that. All right. And I'm not sure, I haven't done this before, but do you start off the meeting with some things to say?
No, you do. Go
I
for it.
do. Okay.
Right into it.
Well, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you, tellers, for putting in the extra time last night to do our sound check and our visuals, and really appreciate you putting in all the work you've done so far. Is this going to be a great night? And we have some very interesting combinations of stories. Um, and you guys, those people of you who know me, I'm more of a true personal story, but now I've really been moved to explore all these myths and, you know, a very adventurous story. Our first teller is Prakrati Agarwal, who is also our Zoom tech. And so I have asked her to be first. And her story is called The Birth of the Night. Now, Prakati loves weaving stories with hidden meanings and unraveling ancient myths, spinning riddles that challenge the mind. And every story that she tells carries a whisper of wisdom or a spark of wonder and an invitation to see the world through a different lens. Now, I asked most of you to give me your favorite childhood story or scary story, and she said her favorite scary story always revolved around the night. So she's bringing you a story from the Indian mythology, the birth of the night. Are you ready?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Claire. Okay,
You
so
look good.
let me tell you a story as old as time itself. A tale carried by the wind and the stars. The story of the first humans, the twins, Yum and Yummy. Imagine a place of eternal spring where trees stood tall and proud, always forever heavy with ripe, juicy fruits. The flowers always blooming in endless colors, their petals never drooping, never wilting, never fading. The rivers always running with pure and cool water, the water as sweet as honey. And the birds in the sky sang the most beautiful songs from dawn to dusk. So technically, there was no dawn and no dusk, as there was no yesterday and no tomorrow, because there was only the endless embrace of an everlasting today. And in this beautiful world, Yum and Yummy lived, the two twins, their hearts beating in the perfect harmony. You could hear them running through the wild flowers, their laughter ringing in the warm air, them dancing in the golden sunlight. They were so carefree because they never knew any kind of sorrow, any kind of grief. They didn't know hunger. For them, they believed that the world was a beautiful song and they were their chorus, a joyful chorus. But then, one day, a stillness fell. Yummy came back from her walk, expecting her brother waiting for her and with a smile on his face. But instead, she saw her brother lying under a giant tree. She looked at her brother. She touched him. His skin, once soft and warm with life, was now cold and stiff. His chest did not rise. His breath was gone. Yum, the first to ever die. A great and terrible sorrow came over Yummy. She had never known any kind of loss before, never known an end to anything. And so the entire grief took hold of her. She called out his name many times, shook him, shook his shoulders, begged him to wake up. But Yum did not wake up. Yum could not answer Yummy. Yummy could not hold her grief any longer, and her grief heavy as a storm came out of her eyes, as endless river of tears. Her cry, her wailing was so loud that it shook the earth. Her pain burned so fiercely that it made the air hot. The creature started wailing with her. It felt like the entire earth would drown in her sorrow. And the gods from above watched her, worried, for they knew that this grief of hers was so strong, so powerful, that it would bring the end to the entire world. And so the gods came down from their high places, stepping down into the world, into our world, yours and mine, into taking the forms of us, and sat around Yummy, who was kneeling beside Yum, broken and weeping. They sat around her in a circle of light and whispered to her, Yummy, Yummy, all things must end. Even the brightest day has to give way to dusk. But Yummy could not even hear them. She just kept repeating over and over only one thing: Yum died today. Yum died today. And the gods felt pity over her. For they understood. How could she understand this loss when all she had ever known was the endlessness of the present? Without yesterday, there was no past, and without tomorrow, there is no future. And so, the gods devised a plan. Together, the gods did a great magic. They reached up to the sky and pulled down the sun beneath the horizon where it had never been before. And as it disappeared into the horizon, the sky darkened into a deep velvety black. One by one, tiny silver lights flickered into the sky, the first stars. And in their midst, a great glowing orb arose, bathing the entire sky, the entire earth into soft silver light. It was the first night. For the first time, the earth fell into a hush. The creatures quieted down, the birds silenced, the rivers slowed their rush, and all the land creatures curled into themselves, resting in the embrace of the dark. And Yummy, for the first time, lay down beside her brother's body, so tired with so much of weeping. She felt a strange heaviness pull at her eyes, and for the first time in her life, Yummy slept. When she awoke, the sky was ablaze with hues of pink and gold. The sun, hidden for the first time, had risen again, painting the heavens with different colors. A new day had begun. And as Yummy watched the light creep across the sky, she whispered, Yum died yesterday. The next day she said, Yum died the day before yesterday. And with each new night, each new dawn, time began to flow. The sun would set and the moon would rise, and Yummy's sorrow, though still present, began to soften. The dark night held her sorrow, her grief gently and cradled it and allowed it to rest. And the passage of time, like a river, took her pain away little by little. She never forgot Yum. She still felt his absence, still carried his memory in her heart. But the sharp edges of her sorrow dulled, became something softer that she could hold on to without it breaking her apart. And on that day, the gods gave us, you and me, a great gift. The gift not just to soothe Yummy's grief, but to teach all of us the rhythm of life, the balance of light and dark, the healing power of time. And so, night became a blessing, a promise that even in the deepest sorrow, there is rest, that even in the darkest night, there are stars to guide us, and that no matter how heavy our sorrow is, our grief is, the sun will always rise again, bringing with it the gentle, patient touch of a new day. And that is how the night came to be.
Oh,
Thank you.
that's wonderful. Man, that's great. I love that story. I love the poetry. I mean, it was just like poetry. Things like a joyful chorus and a great and terrible sorrow, and the passage of time. I've made notes. I just thought, what a romantic and poetic story. I appreciate it very much, Prakati.
Thank you, Claire.
Ah, this is going to be a night. Okay, well, while we're talking about the universe and the heavens, I thought this story, Liz Nichols will tell a story, A World Without Sun, which is a Japanese Shinto. Did I say that right? Shinto myth?
Shinto.
Shinto. Okay. So we'll see the difference between the night and the sun.
Indeed, indeed. I love how myths from different cultures pose different answers in a way, but to these same universal questions that we all have. And so Shinto is the native belief system of Japan. It means the way of the kami, the way of the gods. And the belief is that everything in nature, from the great to the small, has a spirit.
Well, Prakati, I'm going to review her bio a little bit and talk about her favorite story. So I'm just in terms of highlighting, spotlighting. Liz likes to say she got lost in the 389 Dewey Decimal section of her public library, which I had to look it up, but it's folklore and mythology. And that was in the North Bronx when she was 9 years old. And she still hasn't found her way out yet. And Liz, of course, most of you know, is the co-host of the Contra Costa Tale Spinners, our favorite local group. She's a former SAC board member, and she works on the Bay Area Storytelling Festival. And her favorite bedtime is maybe an ancient myth from Greece, or maybe it's from Japan, like this one. Go ahead.
Right. Thank you. In the beginning, there was no heaven and no earth. You may have heard something that starts that way. That's the way the Shinto creation myth starts. There was nothing but a misty, formless swirling. And out of that emerged deities, celestial deities, two of whom were given the command to create the world. In other words, the islands of Japan. They were named Izanagi and Izanami. They were male and female. They were brother and sister, husband and wife. As time went on, Izanami, the goddess, she gave birth to all the things of the natural world that make Japan so beautiful. The oceans and the mountains, the rivers and the plains, earth, water, air, and fire. And when she gave birth to fire, the god of fire burned his mother so badly that she died. She died and disappeared. And her husband was grief-stricken, and he searched and searched. And when he finally found her, she was disgusting. She was a rotting, stinking corpse in the land of the dead, the underworld called Yomi. Now, he tried to bring her back. We've heard about those kind of things. And we'll hear more about it later tonight. He tried to bring her back, but he failed. And when he came back to the land of the living, he too was covered with the filth and pollution of death. And so he stood in a clear mountain stream and he washed. And when he wiped his left eye, there was the sun. Bright and beautiful she was. And he named her Amaterasu, and he placed her to rule over the high plane of heaven. And then appeared the moon, Tsukuyomi, and he was given the realm of the night. And then the last of these three siblings was named Susanoo, the reckless, raging, rushing man, the god of storms, of all the violent forces of nature. And his father sent him out to sea to rule over the waves. But Susanoo did not want to stay there. He came onto the land over and over, wailing and crying and complaining and wreaking havoc everywhere he went. He went up to the high plane of heaven to visit his sister. And even though he promised to be good and not to make a mess, he wrecked her beautiful rice fields that she was cultivating. He even took, pardon me, a stinky crap in her sacred weaving hall. Now, before I tell you what happened next, I got to ask, is there anybody else here who is an older sibling? Raise your hand. Okay, so you know how frustrating it is when your little sibling wrecks everything, breaks your toys, messes up your games. They even get away with it sometimes. But now let's give a chance to the younger siblings. Where are you? Where are you, the younger siblings? Don't you hate it when you're always being told, get out of here, you don't belong here, you're just making a mess, right? And one time, Amaterasu and Susanoo had such a bad fight that Susanoo decided to do the worst thing possible. He found a dead horse, he skinned it, and he dropped this bloody carcass through the chimney hole of Amaterasu's sacred weaving hall. And it landed splat and ruined eons of the fabric of the universe. Well, she was ashamed of him. She was repulsed by him. And she was so furious at him, she withdrew. And she went into the hided the hidden cave of heaven. And she pulled a huge boulder in front and she stewed. Now, when I was a kid and my little sister would broke my favorite toy, or if sometimes I got sent from the table at dinner, I don't know why, but when I got really upset, I would go into my room, I would slam the door and sit there in the dark and wait, but nobody came. Like the world, life went on. But Amaterasu was the sun. So when she went in that cave, the light went out of the world, the warmth went out, nothing grew, it was chaos. So all the other deities, they gathered in front of that cave and they talked with each other. What were they going to do? Please come out. We need you. We need you. But she was too mad to hear. And so they realized after a while, we have to figure out a way to entice her out. So the first thing they did was they invented and created the first mirror in the world. It was made of polished bronze, shiny, and they hung it in a tree right outside that cave. Then they all started to pretend they were having a wonderful party. There was laughing and singing, and there was drinking and carousing. It was all fake, but they pretended. And at one point, the goddess Ame no Uzume, who was the goddess of dance and joy, she took a wooden tub, and turned it upside down. And she got up on top of it and she started to pound a rhythm. And everybody started to clap along. And then she started to dance. Now, she was not the most beautiful or the youngest, but she was wild and crazy. And she stripped down to her undergarments. And even those undergarments started to slip. And pretty soon everybody was cheering and clapping and going wild. And Amaterasu heard. And she had to know. Why are they having what's going on? It sounds like so much fun without me. And so she pushed that boulder just a tiny little bit and she peeked out. What's going on? Is there a party out there? Yes, we're partying. Well, why? Why? Well, because we found another goddess. She's just as bright, as beautiful as you are. And so we're celebrating. What? How? Who? She had to know who. And so she pushed that boulder further to the side. And she stepped out. And what was the first thing she saw? The reflection of her own bright, beautiful face. Now, as soon as she did that, the gods took a sacred rope and they put it over the entrance to that cave, making a taboo space that no one could enter. That way, she was forced to stay in this world. And thank goodness for us, she has continued to stay. So that's how the sun came back to the world. But you might be thinking, what about Susanoo? What happened to him? Well, he continued raging out to sea, and as we all know, sometimes on the land as well. But sometimes he used those powers to do good things. And the best thing he did was to defeat a horrible, monstrous serpent, giant. And when he killed it, he cut off its tail. And in that tail was a sword, a magical, magnificent sword called the grass cutter. And he took that sword and he gave it to his sister Amaterasu by way of apology. And that sword, as well as that mirror I told you about and the sacred jewel that hung from that mirror, well, they've been handed down to Amaterasu's descendants. And they still are the 3 imperial treasures of the Japanese royal family.
Thank you so much, Liz. I noticed something that I thought I would never hear in a story on this group: stinky crap. in the sacred weaving hall. I wrote that down, but I love the siblings.
Japanese mythology has a lot of body, functions and things like that, yeah, we would be shocked. That was nothing.
Oh, good. We'll hear more then the next time. All right. Well, thank you. I'm learning so much. Intros. I've got some little message here that says something about highlighting. Okay. Oh yeah. Hi, Vicki. There we've got some comments coming up too. Our next speaker is Manjuri. I don't know if we'll get any stinking crap in this one. This is a mythological story called The Race. And Manjuri's a retired kindergarten teacher, and she enjoys telling stories on the regional platforms like Chennai Storytelling Festival and international platforms like the Bay Area Storytelling Festival. And the scariest story she heard as a child was Hansel and Gretel. She thought the witch was very scary. And so I'll give you Manjuri.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening. My name is Manjuri Gopte, and I'm telling from Mumbai, India. Here goes. Lord Shiva and his consort, Parvati, and their two children, the elephant-headed god Ganesha and Kartikeya. Their family used to reside in the Himalayas. And Lord Shiva, as we all know, is the god of yoga. He would be meditating on Mount Kailash. And one day, as he was deep in meditation, he heard some disturbances. And he paused to hear who it was. It was a priest asking him which god they should pray to before starting any ritual or any ceremony. And Lord Shiva immediately asked his consort and wife, goddess Parvati, who was the wise one. She said it has to be one of her children, either Ganesha or Kartikeya. They, after all, have our attributes. How shall we decide? Let us call them and tell them to have a race, and whoever comes first after going round the universe will win the prize. So she called the two boys and she told them they had to go around the universe, and whoever came first would win a prize, a mango, a juicy mango, which they both loved, she knew. Kartikeya was the strong one, and his peacock, which is his vehicle, was very swift. And so he was excited and eager to leave and win the race. So he sat on his peacock and whoosh, he was out of the window. He went over the hills, over the mountains. Ooh, he was enjoying himself. Ganesha was a bit disappointed with his mother. He asked her, "Did you want our brother to win? How can I go faster than him on my mouse?" That was his vehicle. But then he was the wise one. He had innate intelligence. And so he told his parents to sit in the center, and he circumambulated around them 3 times. He said, "You are my universe, after all." His parents were deeply happy about the reverence he was showing them. In the meantime, his brother Kartikeya was back. Whoosh! On seeing Ganesha there, he was puzzled. "How did you get back so soon?" "Oh, brother, I think you have won. You actually went round the universe." But then their parents told him what had transpired. And they also asked Ganesha, "What did you see when you went around us?" So this was his answer. He said, "First time when I circumambulated around my mother, I saw that the world revolves round her divine play. Second time when I circumambulated around my father, I saw that his divine consciousness is behind all our thoughts and actions. And the third time I circumambulated around you both, I saw that your union is like the two sides of the cosmic coin. So I have realized that everything is, after all, an illusion except this power that I can see." His parents were amazed by his intelligence and wisdom, and they decided that he would get the prize. When he was given the mango, he promptly shared it with his brother Kartikeya, who again was deeply touched by his show of brotherly love. And Shiva also, Lord Shiva told the priest that Lord Ganesha should be the one to pray to before starting any ritual, any ceremony. Today, in fact, when we start any ceremony, any ritual, for example, if you go to a new house and you want to do a small ceremony there, we first pray to Lord Ganesha to seek his blessings, because he is, after all, the Vignaharta. He is to be prayed to for his wisdom, and because he is extremely wise and intelligent, and he is also gives peace and contentment in the house. Today, before ending the story, I want to say a prayer to Lord Ganesha to show my devotion. प्रथम तुला वंदितो कृपाळा, प्रथम तुला वंदितो कृपाळा, गजानना गणराया, प्रथम तुला वंदितो कृपाळा. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hey, I love it when we get singing. That was great. And thank you for the information about
Yeah.
Ganesha. I have a mask thing, a collection. I have one of Ganesha, but I didn't, I got it because it was beautiful and cool, but now I know the story
Yeah.
and the wisdom. So now I prize it even more. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, let's see, where are we now? We're going to our guest from Colorado, Cooper Braun, and he's telling a rework of Sleeping Beauty.
I think
Yes,
Beth is
we are
next.
Beth. We are on Beth right now.
I'm sorry?
We probably are going to wait for Cooper for just a bit.
Oh, sorry, I have Beth after Cooper.
Oh, and I'm 4 on my list, but whatever you need to do.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry if I messed that up, but are you okay with that, Cooper?
I think the information that we all had was Beth was 4, Dave is 5, I'm 6, but I give me a moment and I can happily tell now if that works better.
Well, let's go ahead and do Beth, and then we'll do Dave. Oh, I see. I've got 2 different lists, and one is an old one. That's what I'm looking at. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, so Beth. Now, what have I learned about Beth? Oh, she's going to tell a nice one. It's called, the story is The Woman Who Flummoxed the Fairy. It's an old tale from Ireland, and I think it might be a little bit humorous. Beth spent a lot of time, many hours at the Bay Area Story Festival, a storytelling festival over the years, and she got hooked into the magic of storytelling and puppetry. at a workshop in Santa Rosa, at the Santa Rosa Library. And of course, she's told stories to her granddaughters, and they grew into storytellers. And her favorite story book was a collection by Shirley Temple Black, one of which was Rapunzel.
Yep.
So go ahead, Beth.
Thank you. It's such an honor to have so much wonderful international and cultural wisdom. Well, this is a story from the Irish and Scottish folklore tradition, and it is The Woman Who Flummoxed the Fairies. Now, in that time when the fairies could fly more freely among the folk, there lived a woman who was an incredible baker. In fact, she could create bannocks that were as tender as wheaten cakes, and her wheaten cakes, they were like the finest pastries. And her pastries, her pastries were like heaven itself in your mouth. She was in such demand that she made a pretty good living. And she was quite honest, too, for if she knew that you had money, she would charge a pretty penny. But for those folk with just a few coins in their purse and wanted her to create a wee small cake for their celebration, she would say, wait until the cake is baked. And then she would create just as fine a creation as she would for the gentry and deliver it to the christening for the parents there or to the couple getting married with best regards from her husband and herself, so there would be no bad feelings. Now, she was not only an incredible baker, she was the cleverest woman in the world. The first got her into trouble, and the second got her out. Now, the fairy folk have their own fine food, indeed, but now and then they really love to have a slice of cake. They'd been known to fly into the kitchens at night and steal a piece. But the cakes they craved the most were the ones created by this baker, and they were hard to come by, for they were usually eaten all in one sitting, with nary a crumb for a fairy to find. And so they plotted, and they planned on how to keep her to bake just for them. Well, their opportunity came not long after that, for there was to be a large wedding at the castle, and the baker was to create all the cakes. Well, she knew she would have to be there all day, and she planned with her husband the path she'd take home, which was by a small little mound. It might become a fairy mound. Not sure. That hillock had some nice bushes on it, and she stayed at the castle, and she baked. Now, the fairies, being small, loved to listen in keyhole areas, and they heard that path, and so they planned what would happen. And she began her walk home. The moon was shining. She came close to this little hillock, and oh my, the fireflies are thick tonight. It was all shimmery, but it wasn't fireflies. It was the moonlight shining off the fairy's wings. And the minute she came just close enough, they all flew out. Down came the fern seed and the fairy dust. Oh, I'm that weary. I'm going to sit for just a second. And down she went, boom, asleep and whisked into fairyland without her knowing. She knew nothing until she woke up and her eyes opened, and she realized what had happened and said, my, I've always wanted a peek at fairyland, and here I am. Yes, said the fairies, yes, and now you can bake for us forever and ever. Well, you poor wee thing, she said, not wanting to stay there forever, but she pulled out her apron and said, let's get right on to baking a cake. I've been cooking for everyone else and not a cake for you. And so, let's see. As she looked, and could not find anything to cook. Nothing for an ingredient for a cake. You'll have to be going to my kitchen and bring me back things, and we can do that. So off she sent for some with butter and some for the eggs and some for the flour and some for the sugar and some for the milk and all those spices that you need. And she had it all together and said, I need a bowl. Well, the largest bowl in fairyland was maybe the size of a demi-tasse. So small an egg couldn't fit in it. You'll have to be going back to my kitchen. I need my yellow crockery bowl and my wooden spoons and my egg whisks and my pans. And so the fairies were flying back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It was all assembled. She put everything in the big bowl that she needed and began her stirring. And it was looking pretty good, except she stopped. Oh, I'm that used to my cat purring at my feet to help me keep the rhythm. Fetch the cat, said the Fairy King, and the cat was brought in. And she stirred and she stirred and she stopped. Ah, do you know, I need my dog. He snores at every second beat so I can keep the rhythm and keep the batter going. Fetch the dog, said the Fairy King. Well, in came the big hound dog, and when he saw his mistress, he was content, lay down, and began to snore. And she stirred and she stirred, and the batter was becoming just almost right. But she had to look down and look up at the fairies and say, "Oh, I can't go on. I'm that worried about my bairn. My babe has been with his dog all day and doesn't eat. Fetch the babe," said the Fairy King. And as soon as the babe saw his mother, my goodness, pandemonium broke out. There's nothing quite like a babe who's been unhappy. The screaming got louder and louder. She tried to hold the babe and stir the batter. And finally she said, maybe I can't stop now. The cake might fail. Can you bring my husband? And that was done. The poor man, he'd watched everything go flying off the shelves, flying through the house all morning and all that evening. And there he went. And the minute he saw his wife, he knew things would get just a wee bit better. And so he held the babe, who continued to scream, of course. And she finished up the batter, just about ready to pour it in the pans, but handed the baby the wooden spoon, and the baby began to bang and bang and scream and scream. And then in the commotion, she whispered, "Pinch the dog." He wasn't sure why, but he did, and that howling lifted up the noise even louder. And she said, "Tread on the tail of the cat." And so between the yowling of the cat and the howling of the dog and the beating of the spoon and the screaming of the babe, the poor fairies were flying all around with their hands over their ears. For if there's one thing fairies can't abide, it's loud noise. And it was more than loud in Fairyland that day. And once more, she knew it. And she knew they didn't like it. And so, just as she got all the batter poured into the pans, she took the spoon away from the babe and popped a lump of sugar right in his mouth. Surprised him so much he was totally quiet. Nodded to her husband. He stopped pinching the dog and took his foot off the cat. And it was silent. And the fairies collapsed to the floor. She held up her pans and said, "Well, I'm ready to bake the cake. Where's the oven?" Every fairy just looked so dismayed, and they looked at the Fairy Queen, and she had to admit, there is no oven. Mm-mm. "Well, I have the cake. How do you expect me to be baking it?" "You'll have to take me back to my kitchen. I will bake the cake, and then you'll have to bring me back and get the cake." The fairies looked around, and they looked at that spoon, and they looked at the babe, and they looked at the cat, they looked at the dog, and they looked at their king. And the Fairy King said, "You may all go." Ah, now that the woman had what she wanted, she felt sorry and said, "I shall bake this cake for you, and I will leave it where you found me. And what's more, I will leave a cake there every week." That brightened up all the fairies a bit, and the king said, "I'll not be outdone. What you find there, you shall keep." And so he opened up Fairyland. The mound was open, and out walked the husband with the babe in one arm and the bowl and all of the baking things in there, and the woman with her pans of batter and the dog and the cat. And they went straight down the path to their cottage and never looked back. And the only sounds left in that lovely kitchen was the ticking of the clock and the purring of the cat and the snoring of the dog and the cooing of the babe, who had just finished a lovely meal, and the husband saying, "I am the luckiest man in the world." Not an argument there, because as the baker left her cake, she found a small brown bag. The inside, it was gleaming with gold. And every week after that, she left a cake for the fairies, and they left a small bag for her. They never saw the fairies again, but they became as wealthy as they wanted and lived, and why should they not, happily ever after? And that's that tale.
Well, now I'm starving for cake.
Yes, and there's a recipe, maybe.
Yeah, send us all the recipe. Well, that was really fun, Beth. I really enjoyed that. I'm very impressed with your storytelling.
A little different level than our wonderful world myths, but we all have to come to home sometimes.
And you didn't have to say what was the term stinky crap is listed.
That's only if the cake batter breaks or something. Yeah.
Okay, let's see who is next. Make sure I check on the right list. Dave Darvin. Dave, let's see. Dave came out here, by the way, to Rossmore, my storytelling group, and helped us with some teaching of my folks. And he's going to talk about the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. I think I pronounced that right. I looked it up. It's a Greek myth, and it'll be fun. Dave's a retired public servant turned storyteller. He tells the first person stories and historical fiction stories, and he likes stories that amplify the values of the middle class. I think that's kind of an interesting statement. I'd like to get him down with a drink sometime and understand that more. Besides his public performances, he leads workshops on legacy storytelling for seniors. And I didn't get your favorite bedtime story, Dave. Do you remember what your favorite bedtime story is, or scary one?
I don't have a favorite bedtime story, but I do have a favorite funny little book. It's written by an Italian writer. It's called Telephone Stories. And it was some guy that told stories to his granddaughter over the phone. They're all short, like 2-minute stories. Very cute, very imaginative. One of my favorite little books and collections of stories.
Oh, great. All right. Well, let's hear what happens with Orpheus and I'm going to say it again, Eurydice. Eurydice.
You did a good job.
You can go on YouTube and learn how to pronounce these things.
What I do.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so my name is Dave, and it is my great pleasure to be here with you this evening. But before I start to tell this story, I just want to do a little kind of sidebar thing. This is a Greek story. This story started to form 4,000 years ago. So people thought differently than we do. They perceive the world differently. And this story is about the afterlife. And for the Greeks, there was no heaven. There wasn't the kind of hell that we imagine. And I'm telling the story in the first person as one of the people in the story. So, but before I begin actually telling the story, I'd like you to, just for a minute, close your eyes and to think about what it was like 4,000 years ago. Take a deep breath. There was no internet. There are no cell phones. There are no electric lights. It is dark with only the light of the stars and the moon. And on the island of Crete, you can hear the waves crash in the distance. And as a group, we are all sitting around a fire. And the storyteller steps forward and he begins to tell a story. I am the god of the underworld. I am the king of all the shades. I am Hades, and I have ruled here for millennia. And no one is allowed to come from the living world to the land of the dead and then to rise back up to the land of the living, except one, my beautiful queen, Persephone. And she will rise soon back to the world of the living as spring starts to unfold. There has only been one other person who came from the land of the living and was allowed to go back. And his name was Orpheus. Now people say all kinds of things about Orpheus. Some people say he was a hero. Some say he was a great lover and a wonderful husband, a dedicated man. Some people say he was a fool or a charlatan. I don't know. I just know how I experienced him. You decide. Now, Orpheus, when he was born, he was a handsome and beautiful boy. And at about 7 years old, Apollo gave him a lyre, a stringed instrument to play. And Orpheus was gifted. When he played, people would come out of their homes just to listen. If he was in the forest, which is one of the places he loved to be, the animals would come to him. The birds would come down out of the trees and they would sit at his feet. And sometimes, the wood nymphs would come out and they would dance while he would play. Well, Orpheus went through life playing and he became more and more famous, and pretty soon he was traveling all through Greece playing. And when he was about 20 years old, he went back to Crete to see his mother, and he went out one day in the forest and was playing, and the wood nymphs came out. And as he gazed upon them as they danced on the edge of the forest, he saw one. They locked eyes, and he fell deeply in love. It was as if he was struck by a thunderbolt from Zeus himself. And her name was Eurydice. And Eurydice experienced the same thing. And so they spent all their time together for the next week, and then they were married. The town rejoiced. There was a huge wedding. And after the wedding, they went back to Orpheus's home. The next morning, Eurydice rose and she walked out into the forest to go see the other wood nymphs. And as she walked through this open field close to the edge of the forest, she stepped upon a serpent who turned around and struck her right in the heel. And she died right there on the spot. Orpheus was heartbroken. He didn't know what to do. He ranted and raved, and then he locked himself away for a while. And then he picked up his lyre and he began to play. And he walked out of his home, he walked across the island, and he walked straight to the river Styx, the border between the land of the living and the land of the dead. And the boatman was there. And the boatman said, "You cannot cross." But Orpheus played his lyre, and soon the boatman said, "Come on over." He crossed the river Styx and he started to make his way towards my King Hades' throne room. And my dog, my guard dog, my three-headed, vicious Cerberus, rushed towards Orpheus to tear him to pieces. And Orpheus just stood and played his lyre. And Cerberus sat at his feet. Soon, Orpheus made his way through all the shades that were wandering in the land of the dead, right up in front of me to my throne room. And he was playing his lyre. Persephone, she was entranced by his music. And I must admit, I was moved. And when he stopped playing, he told his story. He talked about his love for Eurydice. He talked about her being bitten by the snake. And he begged, and I mean begged, for her life, that he might be able to take her and leave the land of the dead and return to the land of the living. I said no at first, but Persephone was persuaded and she began to push and to prod me. And soon I relented and I told Orpheus, take Eurydice and you can go back to the land of the living. But then I started to regret that decision. No one had ever done this before. It was uncalled for. And so I made an additional agreement. I told him, Orpheus, you are going to lead her out, but you cannot look back. If you look back, she will return to the land of the dead. And so Orpheus took her hand, and he started to lead her out through the land of the dead. They made it all the way through, and as they started to come up a stairway up from the land of the dead into the land of the living, he heard a sound. He could have swore he heard Eurydice stumble, and he turned to look just as she was coming up out of the land of the dead, and she just disappeared back into the land of the dead. Orpheus just watched in disbelief. He wandered to his home and locked himself into his house for a long time. No one's really sure what happened to Orpheus afterwards. There are legends, there are stories, but I don't know which ones are true. I just know that my story, the one I just told you, is true. It's what I saw. And so I think it's important to remember, who was Orpheus? Was he a hero, a great lover, or a charlatan?
Thank you, Dave. Wow, that was so fun. Yes, it was powerful. And like Ed's saying in the chat, mesmerizing. I liked the dog part. I thought liked that. That was cool. And it felt like a couple of modern day people. What's his name? The Hades and Persephone. Oh come on, honey, let it. It just sounded so contemporary.
Well, men and women have been doing that since the dawn of time.
And there's your lesson. All right, let's see. Where are we here? All right, I want to make sure I'm getting people in the right order right now. So now we have Cooper Braun, and we'll finish off the evening with Cynthia Kudaback. Let's see. I was starting to say earlier, which he's doing a rework of Sleeping Beauty. Cooper's doing a reworking of Sleeping Beauty, and he calls Madness, Death, and Roses, which is interesting, I think. And he was also raised by granola eating coyotes. Must mean hippies or something, and grew up without a television. His stories remind us that traditional tales can be funny, dark, poignant, and anything but dry. Now, I did ask for his favorite bedtime story, but I got a strange answer. I refused to learn to read until the third grade because I could not read the books I wanted to hear, most specifically, The Three Musketeers. So I hope he's had a chance to read it since then. And we appreciate you dialing in all this way to join us tonight. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Claire. And if you are the kind of person to whom this matters, David, thank you for your story. For those of you on the West Coast, at 2:01 this coming night, Persephone rejoins the upper world as we reach the equinox and the world begins to shift again. What does a kingdom need with 4 princes? Nothing. Now, we all knew the story of the rosewood. I'm sure it had another name once. If you went in, you didn't come out. I mean, peasants grazed their sheep there in the shadow of the woods, and my brothers and I even hunted in the periphery, but once you saw the roses, you turned back or you didn't come out. Now, we all knew the stories, that there, deep, deep in the woods, wrapped in briars, was a kingdom, a crown to be won in the tallest tower of the castle to be found. That was horseshit. No one went in or out of those woods. Except for me. So why'd I do it? Because I was bored. Because a kingdom doesn't need 4 princes, and my brothers will always remind me of that fact. Or maybe I just wanted to prove I'm not my father's useless 4th son. But I did. I rode in. The sunlight cut through the trees deeper than I'd ever gone before. New growth turned to old, and then I began to smell it. You know that heady scent of roses. It grew more the deeper I rode in, and then I saw them, like jewels, rubies, or drops of blood where the sun caught them. And my horse began to shy back. I put my spurs to him, but he began to rear, and I can ride out a startled horse, but this was madness. His eyes were rolling. He began to froth. I jumped clear as he spun on his hooves, and he ran. They were just roses. I picked myself up and made my way deeper into the shadows, and then I found I couldn't take a step forward. I looked down. Brambles had wrapped themselves around my feet, the thorns sinking into my boots, and then I watched. I watched the brambles untwine and begin to reach out for me like they were living things. My sword was in my hand, hacking at those that came for me, hacking at the ones at my feet. I stumbled forward and fell. And when I raised my head, I was looking into the eye sockets of a skull. Looking back the way I'd come, back towards the sunlight. As I picked myself up, I turned to go, but behind me the way had closed. It was like a hedge of thorns and roses. The scent was now so thick. The briars still reached for me, but the way forward was open. I hacked forward, and then I saw them, suspended like flies in a spider's web. Dead men. Some hanging in the air, their skeletons and armor held together by brambles, some creeping up through their rib cages, in through eye sockets, others bound to trees or torn apart. Some of the armor was old, as old as my great-great-grandfather wore, and some was new. Deeper and deeper I went, and then the thorns opened before me, into a tunnel filled with shadow and that sweet scent. I don't know why they opened for me, but they did. And so in I went, and the thorns took their toll, but I began to feel in the darkness stones beneath my boots. I emerged into the glare of the sun, a courtyard, a castle. I could hear birds somewhere up above, and the skeleton stood, still clutching a worm-eaten spear in its hand, rusted mail, a helmet fallen over the skull, and there in the courtyard I saw animals, men, women, all just piles of bones. There was the skeleton of a horse, the bit and stirrup irons, all that was left. It was as if there had been a massacre, but who kills chickens? In the throne room, there were more piles of bones, and one pair of skeletons still standing, wrapped in one another's embrace, dancers, silk and velvet and bits of hair still clinging to them. It's like the others just lay down and died. And there on 2 thrones, looking down 2 skeletons with crowns still on their skulls, looking at me with empty eye sockets. It was the same everywhere in the castle. The kitchens, larders, bedrooms, animals, men, women just lay down and died. I couldn't understand, not then. But the tallest tower, that's what the story said. I found it on the 2nd try. Up those winding stairs I went, and the tower room was dark. I could see the faint outline of a window there. I stumbled. The floor was soft. The window hinges were rusty. They screamed as I pried them open, and light flooded the room. And I saw. Lying on the bed, she wasn't a skeleton, but she might as well have been. I could see every bone in her face. Her skin was dry and translucent like parchment. She was the oldest woman I have ever seen. Her hair had grown and grown, a thick gray mat that covered the floor. It's what I had tripped on, and her fingers or her nails had grown, twisted together. I couldn't tell where one ended and another began. But I saw the gentle rise and fall of her chest. She was alive. And then her eyes began to flutter, and I was staring into the clearest green eyes I have ever seen in the sunken hollows of that face. She began to cough, to claw at her throat. Her mouth must have been so dry, and without thinking it, I offered her my wineskin. She pried at the cork with those fingers or nails or claws, and she drank and drank and drank. Are you my prince? Your prince? I mean, yes, I am a prince. Your prince. The fairy said, the good fairy said that I would sleep for 100 years, that the castle would fall asleep and I would be woken by a prince. She decreed that I should be queen and him king. You've been asleep for 100 years. Oh, they all just fell asleep. My lady, your majesty, everyone in this castle has been dead for 100 years. Please show me. She tried to sit up, but she was so frail, and the weight of that hair. And then, I swear this on my mother's grave, like the brambles in the woods, her hair began to move. It twisted itself into tendrils, snaking through my feet. It lifted her, cradling her, holding her like some immense spider. Please show me. I led the way down the tower stairs, that thing following behind me. It swept aside the bones there in the throne room, holding her to stand before the 2 skeletons, which they must have been her mother and father. She reached out those fingers to brush the cheek of one of the skulls, and then I watched. I watched tendrils of that hair lift both the crowns, set one on her head and one reaching for me. I saw them wrap around my legs, come for my arms. Again, I cut my way free and I ran, and her voice echoed after me. Please, no, please come back. I made it as far as the gatehouse, and mercifully the thorns opened for me, and I ran, caring not that they tore at my flesh. I emerged from the woods ragged and bloody, with a long strand of gray hair wrapped around my arms still. So yes, there, deep within the woods, there is a castle, and there is a crown waiting for you. But I tell you, there is nothing there for you but madness and death and the sweet smell of roses. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. It was terrifying. And I'm glad it wasn't the old Sleeping Beauty, the prince kisses her and the blah, blah, blah. And it was a scary version. But you know, the most remarkable thing for me, how I experienced it, was every time you said the scent of roses, I could smell them. Anybody else? I kept smelling roses. The power, I just, oh, really touched me in that way. I was right there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, I guess we have one more teller, and it is my. Are you here, Cynthia? Yes. Okay, she is here. All right, Cynthia Kudabak is my. Her story is called Red. Cynthia is one of the smartest people I know. Um, I always say that about her. We kind of clicked, became friends when we met in storytelling classes at Stagebridge, and she kind of helped mentor me. And we've just always sort of felt a connection, I think. And she likes to braid her passions for science, education, storytelling, and the environment. Go ahead.
Barkeep! Barkeep! Red Hook, please. Yes, I know. So obvious, but my sponsors expect me to stay on brand. What can I say? Yes, I'm that red. Yes, the one with the wolf. Yeah. Listen. Those Grimm brothers, great guys, good for a tumble, but they didn't get it all right, you know? I mean, yes, I was taking treats to grandmother, and we had this sort of game we used to play, Granny and I, where she would spot me coming from a long distance, and she'd stand on her porch and Red, is that you? And I'd say, hey, Granny, what sharp eyes you have. And then she'd say, what's that? Is that my Red's voice? I say, that's Granny, you got such sharp ears. And then I'd show up at the treats, right? And she'd be like, and I'd like, oh, Granny, your teeth. We had a good time, Granny and I. Now, there was a wolf that came around one day when we were together. It didn't disguise itself as Granny, it was a wolf. What do you think? We had to dispatch it. We did get help from Woody, and he taught us both how to dispatch the wolf and how to stake out the hide with stones so that we could tan it. I mean, you've heard the thing about the stones in the stomach and sinking it. Why would you waste a good wolf hide that way? All right, but here's the thing. This experience really was transformative. I realized that I was never going to have to deliver baked goods again. This power of dealing with this vicious predator really went to my head. Now, you have to remember, this was a long, long time ago. Yes, I've been alive for a very, very long time. In these days, nights were dark, and the wolf really was the biggest and baddest, and it was a real threat. So I became a wolf hunter, and I became a really, really good wolf hunter. Now, to hunt the wolf, you have to think like the wolf, right? You got to know where they go, where they hide. And sometimes this odd sort of connection develops. There was one time especially, I had been hunting for the male wolf, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw a wolf, dispatched it with a single arrow. And when I went to make sure the wolf was dead and not suffering, I realized that it was a nursing mother with milk leaking from her teats. Now, my own son, Woody's and mine, was at the time about a year old. And when I saw this wolf, my own bosom ached in sympathy. One important thing is you can't just let the babies starve, right? That's inhumane. So I went to the den to find the babies of this wolf mother. And I dispatched them pretty quickly, most of them, because you see, this one wolf, instead of running and howling and things, just sort of sat there and looked at me. I couldn't kill it. I took it home. That was Cody. Now, Cody became the beginning of my little homegrown wolf breeding project. Every year I would mate Cody's children and grandchildren and then keep only those wolf cubs that were especially friendly. Well, after several generations, something very interesting happened. The wolves stopped looking like wolves. They got softer, rounder muzzles, floppier ears. They started looking more like cubs. I was the first, although I didn't name it, to discover neoteny, the fact that the traits that make a puppy attractive and adorable to its parents, they're tied. Being friendly and being cute actually are genetically linked in wolves. It was amazing. Hi, Cody. Now, I mentioned I've been around a long time because, they say that as long as someone's telling your story, you never die. And, well, people have been telling my story for a long time. It wasn't but a few hundred years later that we pretty much ran out of wolves. And we gradually started to realize that we were the biggest, baddest thing in the forest. And that humans were more destructive than any wild animal. That's why I was thrilled, I tell you, thrilled to bits when I heard from the people in Yellowstone. They were going to try an experiment of bringing wolves back to the national park. And I got to help them with that, with my expertise in wolf spotting and whatnot. It was wonderful. Just one wolf pack was moved into Yellowstone. And within a year, things were changing in a big way. I mean, sure, the wolf were eating the elk, but more importantly, the wolf were chasing the elk, so the elk moved away from the streams. And they stopped churning up the stream sides with their pointy little hooves, and they stopped eating all the plants by the streams. So the grasses started growing, and the little bushes. And when there were grasses and bushes, the little mice and the birds moved in. And when the mice and the birds moved in, the coyotes returned. And when all those bushes grew strong roots, the banks stopped eroding, and the river started running cleaner. And when the river ran cleaner, the beaver returned, and the beaver built a whole ecosystem of its own. All because we let the wolves come back. It means a lot to me to know that we can still get it right.
Thank you, Cynthia. Oh, neoteny, is that the word?
Yeah, neoteny and trophic cascades, if you want the fancy word for the other part.
See, I told you she was the smartest person I knew. Thank you so much. I thought I had heard the story before, but this was a little bit new to me, so I appreciate it.
Well, I told
Thank
it
you
at
so
Monkey
much.
House about a year ago.
Yeah, I think there's some new parts in it. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Well, I guess we're about ready to pack it in. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to say? Is everybody, take yourselves off mute. Thank you, Prakrati, for all your help in the Zoom stuff. All right, let's get this picture going. Let's see, I'm going to do a print screen control.
Okay, well, this is Ed Lewis. I would like to recommend joining us next month when we do historical stories. It is so fascinating to see what our 17 story swap groups throughout California come up with, and some guest speakers who join us from around the country and the world for historical stories. That to me is very fascinating. I mean, I've had people dress up in costumes, um, come and present interesting stories about historical events. It is very fascinating. So please join us next month at the same time for historical stories.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. I guess we're going to wrap it up and say goodnight.